Welcome back to a very special edition of Farrand Friends Friday. Back in 2019, the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association had the idea to curate a season of programming here in the garden for the public. And unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 crisis, we've had to postpone the programming. But I thought it would be very fun to invite back some of the talented local artists to give a demonstration of what type of workshop they were going to be teaching at our Third Thursday program that was to launch this year. I'm Karen Waltek, the horticulturist for the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association in Hyde Park, New York. And today we're going to be joined by Betsy Jacaruso, a watercolor painter who has a studio in the town of Rhinebeck. She has a gallery space and a teaching studio, and if you're interested in finding more information about her beautiful artwork and her classes, you can go to her website, betsyjacaruso.com. Today she's joining us in the garden, and we're going to be watching a demonstration version of the workshop that we hope to have her teach during this season's Third Thursday programming. But we'll have her come back in a future season, and we hope that you'll be able to join her for a class then. Let's go see what Betsy's going to paint.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Beatrix Farrand Gardens. They are gorgeous today. We're going to be painting a plein air scene here. I've taken the liberty to come ahead of time. We weren't sure what the weather was going to be. I got some photos to familiarize myself, and I decided to get a drawing started to save some time. So we're going to be doing a view overlooking these beautiful peony beds, and there's foxgloves. There's so many gorgeous flowers here, framing the foreground, looking toward the house. So I decided to go ahead and do something with the house sitting in the distance. So I will go ahead and get started painting. I'm probably going to use a watercolor flat brush. This is a 1/2 inch flat, and a watercolor round size 10. And I have a palette that is set up like a color wheel. And so let me get started. So I always like to think about the light when I'm painting anything. And the light's so beautiful here with the flowers, so I was really trying to get a little bit of everything in. So thinking about composition, when you get started, there are a couple of things you can do. I like to bring my cell phone anyway and take a few photos because it helps me to frame out and create a composition. You can also use a viewfinder. This is just an 8x10, and that allows you to frame out your composition as well. So that's one way to begin to create your composition. There are many ways to paint any subject. So I'm going to go ahead and interpret my response to the subject matter, but I always tell any fellow painters or students that you should feel free to improvise and paint how it comes naturally to you. I do like to start with the light. Usually in watercolor, it's easier to paint from light to dark. All rules are meant to be broken, but that is safer. We want to start to get rid of the white of the page where we don't need it, and build. And as we get closer to the end, that's when we have a better idea where to really nail some of our darkest darks and start to adjust the values in some areas. Okay, so I'm actually going to take my flat brush, my flat wash brush, and I am going to, we've got some nice blue in the sky, and I have this color called Verditer Blue. And if you don't have Verditer, it's really a beautiful color for capturing a lot of sky tones. You can take some cobalt blue, that's a pretty standard color that most people have, and mix it with a little white. I used to paint mostly transparent watercolor, but I like both transparent and using more opaque paints in combination. I've decided that whatever calls to you anything goes if you can create a good painting and have some fun doing it. All right, so I think I'll be using a little opaque paint in some of the green trees over the sky color. So I'm going to go ahead and put that everywhere on the top, and I will move around the house. So wherever the edge of my brush is will help to keep paint from bleeding past that surface. Watercolor is a bit challenging and unpredictable, and I want to try and move fairly quickly with this so that I can keep a fairly even wash and not see the brush strokes. And I'm going around the chimney but over the trees here. I probably do want to be a little careful not to be too wet because my paper is a little bit slanted here. So it's going to tend to precipitate down. I'm actually adding a little white into the verditer also. We can also leave a little bit of that white of the page for some of the wispy clouds we're seeing. And I'm actually going to lift out a little more with a damp paper towel. But you can save the white of the page to create some of that. A lot of this is going to be covered up here behind the trees. So there's only so much information we might get in there. And by getting the sky color behind everything, that will help to unify. I may want to save a little bit of the light side of the tree, save the white of the page, because the light is coming from our left. And I might want that left side of the tree to be a little brighter, so I'm going to save the white of the page there. Okay, I have a little blossom here, but that can add a little interest to the sky. So anytime I want to have white in the painting, there's two ways I can do it. I can use resist. You can use a candle, you can use masking fluid, but you have to let that dry first. Or you can save the white of the page. So saving the white of the page is actually usually the most impactful, the most brilliant when you're trying to really have that white show up. But you can also sometimes go in and use a little opaque white paint as well. I like to do a little of both sometimes, and I may do that today. All right, so I'm going to let that dry now and move along somewhere else before I go into the facade on the mansion. The light keeps changing, and that's one of the challenges for the plein air artist. Your light is changing, weather can be unpredictable. But fortunately, I did take these photos, and so I'm going to go by. I love the light effect, and I'm sure the sun will be back in a moment, but the light effect hitting the top of the lawn in the center is beautiful against the darker, richer colors in shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, if I want a bright green, a more grass green, and I'm mixing my own color, I'm going to use a more turquoise blue with yellow. If I use cobalt blue, I will get an earthier green. If I use a brighter yellow, a cooler yellow, such as Aurelian or a lemon yellow, it's going to be really bright with that turquoise. So that might be too bright. Let me try a little warm yellow. This is Gamboge Nova. It's nice to have a warm and cool of each of your basic colors. It's also nice to mix some of your own colors because if you have to mix more, it won't matter if you have variations on something. That just adds I refer to it as musical notes. I kind of like to make an analogy with painting to music. Music, dance, I feel like it's all music in a way. So if all the notes are static, then it becomes monotonous or boring. So you want variety of value, you want a little variety of color and tone. And when you mix your own colors, it's easy to get variations. All right, that may be dry enough in the top. I'm going to go ahead and put some color on the mansion. It's a beautiful Naples yellow, and I happen to have some Naples yellow here. If you don't have Naples yellow, then just use a light tint of what yellow you have, or mix a tiny bit of white with it. But this will make my job easier. So I don't really have to go around the dark shutters because they're dark. I'll be able to paint those right over the yellow. So I can try and save some of the white trim, or I can go back later and paint a little white for the trim. I may try and save some. I may do a little of both because there's so much detail, and I'd really like to capture some of the detail without being too fussy and detailed. I don't want it to be too stiff. I want it to feel a little painterly at the same time. So we're just trying to block in a lot of our basics here. All right, on the left corner of the house, I might take a little bit of raw sienna, that's like yellow ochre, maybe a tiny bit of this verditer blue to make a slightly darker version. So the corner of the house is going to be a little bit darker than the front of the facade because all of a sudden it's moving in shadow. And where it suddenly moves into shadow is usually where we'd say the camber is. The camber is the darkest part of the shadow side. So I'm just going to make that a little bit darker. I think I'll warm it up with a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm going to go ahead and get the gray wall in, and then we'll go ahead and get into some foliage. So you can use a blue and a burnt sienna to make any gray. And I'm just going to add a little variation to suggest a little warm and cool. Okay, let's get into some of the foliage, which is so beautiful. This is permanent rose. So I'm just going to lay a little color on there. And then I'll come back later and add to it. I'm going to go ahead and capture some of these brighter colors where the light is hitting. So you can use your brush to suggest the direction, suggest stems. And I'm going to save a couple of flowers to try and capture. I'm going to save the white of the page to capture a couple of white flowers. And I'll have it little darker to bring it forward, again using a shift in value. To create a sense of depth. Okay, I love the way these trees are hit in light. So I'm going to get the light in first. Then I'll put some shadow on some of these shapes. It's a beautiful light, late spring kind of green. Leaving some little air holes for the birds to fly through. So I'm going to just be very loose in the foreground with the botanical, with some suggestion of detail. So I like to move around when I'm painting, instead of completing one area and moving to the next, because everything relates to what it's next to. Let's put a little of this ivy here. Let's actually go ahead and put these shutters on the house. I like to use my pinky on the board to help stabilize when I'm trying to get a smaller, more definitive line. Doorway in off the porch, and then a couple shadows. And I'm going to take a little Payne's Gray and get my first wash in on the inside of some of these windows. That always makes a difference. Let's put some shadow here under the ledge. Also these little windows in the stone wall. Now let's put the shadows, start to put some of the shadows in to pull this together. So the light hits the tops of the hedges, so we're going to keep a little bit of that light up at the top. Pull some shadows across the lawn. And also across the pathway. Also use the shape of your brush to get some shapes of the leaves and the tip of the brush to suggest some more stems. So I'm going to put some shadows on that white flower. Okay, so we want to pull this forward maybe by adding a little dark in a few areas for depth. Okay, so we're just about finished. I'm going to just do a few finishing touches here by adding some shadows under the eave in the house. I'm going to add a little pine tree over here. It needs company. There are two. And I'll softly let them blend into what's there so we keep it a little looser. And then I'm going to take a little cerulean blue and just put a little deeper shadow right up under the eave here. And also under the molding along the top of the house. And maybe under the windows. And I'm going to add the fence in, and then we're pretty much complete. So, I'm going to use some white. I'm going to try and use it pretty thickly because this is not gouache. Gouache will show up a little easier. But if you have dark enough around it, I'm just going to suggest this railing. Along the bottom of the house. And if you have a rigger, you can get it a little more fine in terms of your lines. Okay, maybe let's just add a little spatter to suggest some of these white flowers. And I'm just pulling away from the brush. Paint wants to be wet enough, and you have to angle it kind of where you want it. And then just want to get that little red, brownish red roof in under there. We don't want it too dark because it's kind of sitting back in there. And maybe just a tiny bit more dark here in the foreground. Where we're sitting away from the light. And that's about it. A little spatter can be fun and add a nice loose feeling. And then I might just take a tiny bit of orange and pop it into a couple of the centers. Sometimes we see a warmth on the center of these peonies if the center is open enough. I'm fairly complete with the painting, and I might add a few finishing touches, and we'll share with you the final finished painting. And thanks for watching. It's been a lot of fun painting with you in this beautiful spot.
Thanks so much for joining us for this very special version of Farrand Friends Friday. And once again, if you'd like to have more information about Betsy's beautiful artwork and her classes, you can go to her website, betsyjacaruso.com. We'll see you for a future video back here at the Beatrix Farrand Garden. Thanks so much for watching.